The Ethereal Dominion had many talents. Centuries of evolution had blessed them with bioluminescent skin that could blind lesser species, psychic abilities that made telepathy look like amateur hour, and an ego so magnificently inflated it could serve as emergency life support on a failing starship. What they lacked, however, was any meaningful understanding of the concept known as subtlety. This became abundantly clear when their latest diplomatic initiative landed on Nexus 7 with all the grace of a meteor strike. The moon had been specifically designed as neutral ground for interspecies relations, featuring carefully maintained ecosystems where diplomats could engage in traditional bonding activities without actually dying. The architects had spent decades crafting the perfect balance of danger and safety, creating an environment where politicians could pretend to be warriors without the inconvenient risk of becoming casualties. Prince Aethon Veltereth emerged from the ethereal transport in a cascade of prismatic light that would have made a supernova jealous. Standing 7 feet tall with crystalline skin that shifted through the spectrum like an over-enthusiastic mood ring, he represented everything the Dominion considered peak evolution. His bioluminescent tattoos pulsed in patterns that roughly translated to supreme confidence bordering on delusion, though the universal translators tactfully rendered this as eager anticipation. The prince surveyed the assembled diplomatic party with the air of someone examining particularly disappointing livestock. Representatives from a dozen species had gathered for this exercise in controlled violence, each bringing their own cultural interpretation of what constituted proper hunting etiquette. The Graxian delegate kept clicking his mandibles in what passed for polite conversation, while the Velcarian representative maintained that unsettling smile that suggested she knew exactly where everyone's vital organs were located. And then there was the human. She stood roughly 5.5 feet in standard galactic measurements, which put her somewhere between disappointingly compact and adorably pocket-sized by ethereal standard. Her equipment appeared to be a fascinating collection of primitive tools that looked like they belonged in a museum exhibit, titled How Civilization Struggled Before Energy Manipulation. No glowing weapons, no psychic amplifiers, no apparent ability to photosynthesize, just a collection of metal implements that probably required actual physical contact to function. The prince's tattoos shifted to what could generously be called amused condescension. Here was a species that had somehow clawed its way to interstellar status, despite possessing all the natural advantages of particularly determined monsters. No claws worth mentioning, no natural armor, no energy projection capabilities, and apparently no understanding that proper predators should advertise their lethality through appropriate biological modification. Fascinating, Prince Aethon murmured to his aide, a smaller ethereal, whose job primarily involved agreeing with whatever the prince said while maintaining the illusion that this constituted meaningful conversation. The Terran sends someone who appears to have forgotten her weapon. The human in question was examining the hunting preserve's perimeter, with the sort of methodical attention that suggested either profound paranoia or professional competence. Her movements lacked the flowing grace that marked truly advanced species, instead displaying efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. She paused occasionally to study terrain features, weather patterns, and sight lines with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. What the prince failed to notice, though this oversight would prove educational, was that while he announced his emotional state to anyone within visual range, the human had been cataloging every member of the diplomatic party, identifying their preferred fighting style, noting their obvious weaknesses, and calculating approximately how long each would survive in an actual combat situation. Her assessment of the prince had been particularly thorough, and could be summarized as walking target with delusions of competence. The expedition leader, a diplomatically neutral Centaurian, whose species had perfected the art of staying alive by offending absolutely no one, called for attention with a gesture that managed to be simultaneously authoritative and apologetic. "Honored delegates," he began, his voice carrying the carefully modulated tone of someone who had spent decades preventing interstellar incidents. "Welcome to the Nexus 7 diplomatic hunting preserve. Today's exercise will demonstrate the traditional hunting techniques of our various species, while fostering mutual understanding and respect." The prince's bioluminescence shifted to what the translator optimistically labeled enthusiastic agreement, but which more closely resembled barely contained bloodlust. The preserve contains a variety of indigenous species that have been carefully selected for appropriate challenge levels. The Centaurian continued. "Nothing here can actually kill you. The safety protocols are quite comprehensive, but everything has been designed to provide an authentic hunting experience. He gestured toward the sprawling wilderness that stretched beyond the ceremonial starting line. Ancient trees towered overhead, their canopy filtering the system's dual suns into a complex pattern of light and shadow. Somewhere in that carefully maintained ecosystem, creatures waited that had been bred for the specific purpose of making politicians feel dangerous, while keeping them adequately alive. The competition will be scored based on traditional hunting metrics: stealth, efficiency, and successful capture or elimination of prey species. Each delegate will be monitored for safety purposes, though we encourage you to demonstrate the finest techniques your species has to offer. Prince Aethon stepped forward, his form blazing with enough light to serve as a beacon for lost spacecraft. The Ethereal Dominion accepts this challenge with confidence, he announced, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. We shall demonstrate why evolution favored those with proper biological enhancements over species that remained disappointingly baseline. His gaze lingered on the human with the sort of pity typically reserved for creatures that had somehow survived despite obvious design flaws. She met his look with an expression that could have been mistaken for polite interest if one ignored the way she was clearly measuring the distance to his throat. May the most advanced species claim victory, the prince declared, beginning to glow even brighter as his excitement built. The human finally spoke, her voice carrying none of the harmonic enhancement or psychic resonance that marked truly sophisticated communication. Looking forward to it, she said simply. What she didn't add, though her slight smile suggested she was thinking it, was that she had already identified 17 ways to incapacitate the glowing prince without alerting anything else in the preserve to her presence. After all, the first rule of hunting was understanding the difference between being a predator and being prey. And in her professional opinion, anything that announced its location with the enthusiasm of a dying star had already made that distinction painfully clear. The hunting preserve sprawled before them like a carefully orchestrated death trap designed by committee. Every tree had been positioned for optimal dramatic effect, every stream calculated to provide just the right amount of scenic ambiance, and every predator species selected for its ability to look impressively lethal while remaining disappointingly survivable. It was nature as interpreted by bureaucrats, authentic enough to be convincing, sanitized enough to prevent actual casualties. Prince Aethon approached the wilderness with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved by glowing more intense. His bioluminescent tattoos had shifted to what the universal translator diplomatically rendered as hunting mode, though a more accurate translation might have been barely contained urge to prove superiority through violence. The starting signal came via a harmonic chime that somehow managed to sound both ceremonial and apologetic. The various delegates dispersed into the preserve, each following the hunting traditions of their respective species. The Graxian delegate immediately began excavating what appeared to be an elaborate tunnel system, while the Valkyrian representative simply vanished in a way that suggested she understood concepts like stealth and not advertising one's location. Prince Aethon chose a different approach entirely. He strode into the forest like a walking aurora, his crystalline skin refracting the filtered sunlight into prismatic displays that could be seen from orbit. Energy crackled between his fingers as he manipulated local electromagnetic fields, causing nearby vegetation to respond with bioluminescent displays of their own. It was, by any reasonable definition, the exact opposite of hunting behavior. "Observe," the prince announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying enough harmonic resonance to rattle leaves 3 trees over. "The proper application of advanced evolutionary advantages." He gestured grandly, and a nearby flowering bush erupted in sympathetic luminescence. Small creatures scattered in all directions, their survival instincts correctly identifying the presence of something that glowed like a small star as potentially hazardous to their continued existence. Meanwhile, the human had simply disappeared, not in the dramatic fashion favored by species with natural camouflage abilities, but in the far more unsettling way of someone who understood that the best camouflage was not being noticed in the first place. She had studied the terrain during the briefing, identified likely prey migration routes, and selected a position that maximized concealment while providing optimal sightline. Then she had settled in to wait with the sort of patience that suggested she understood the fundamental difference between hunting and performing. The prince, meanwhile, continued his tour of the forest with all the subtlety of a natural disaster. His running commentary on proper hunting technique echoed through the preserve like a nature documentary being narrated by the subject itself. The key to successful predation, he explained to a small mammaloid creature that was too paralyzed with terror to flee, lies in demonstrating superior evolutionary development. Lesser species recognize natural dominance and submit appropriate. The mammaloid, whose evolutionary history had equipped it with excellent pattern recognition, correctly identified the glowing entity as something to be avoided at all costs and promptly fainted. Prince Aethon marked this as his first successful hunt, apparently unaware that rendering prey unconscious through sheer terror was generally considered poor sportsmanship. His tattoos pulsed with satisfaction as he continued deeper into the preserve. Primitive hunting techniques, he mused, presumably referring to every other species in existence, rely on concealment because they lack the biological advantages to hunt openly. True predators need not hide. A philosophical position that might have carried more weight if every creature within a mile radius hadn't already fled in the opposite direction. The human, from her concealed position, watched a small herd of Nexus grazer analogs move along their predictable feeding route. She had been motionless for nearly an hour, her breathing synchronized with the natural rhythms of the forest, her presence so thoroughly integrated with the environment that even the local surveillance drones had difficulty maintaining target line. When she moved, it was with the sort of economy that suggested extensive practice at not being dead. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound, no advertisement of intent until the moment of execution. The selected target, a mid-sized specimen that would provide appropriate proof of capability, never realized it had transitioned from grazing peacefully to successfully hunted, until the process was already complete. The monitoring systems registered her success with the sort of bureaucratic satisfaction that came from witnessing competent paperwork. One target acquired, minimal environmental disturbance, no unnecessary trauma to non-target species. It was hunting as performed by someone who understood the activity as a practical skill rather than a performance art. Prince Aethon's second successful hunt involved cornering a fruit analog creature, whose primary defense mechanism was producing a noxious odor when threatened. The prince's energy manipulation overwhelmed this chemical deterrent, though the resulting light show could be seen from the orbital monitoring station. His triumphant declaration of victory echoed through the preserve with enough volume to cause minor seismic reading. By the time the morning session concluded, the score stood at an interesting 2-1 in the human's favor, though the prince appeared blissfully unaware that anyone else was actually participating in the same competition. His bioluminescent display had attracted a small audience of flying creatures, who seemed to mistake him for either a mating display or a territorial warning, possibly both. The human emerged from the forest looking exactly as she had when she entered, except for the efficient field dressing of her acquisitions, and what might have been the faintest suggestion of amusement. She examined the prince's theatrical remains of his hunting expedition, an area that looked like it had been visited by particularly enthusiastic lightning, and made a mental note that some species apparently believed proper hunting involved leaving calling cards for everything within a 10-mile radius. Interesting technique, she observed mildly as Prince Aethon concluded his latest soliloquy on evolutionary superiority. His tattoos flickered with what the translator rendered as surprised acknowledgement that other participants existed, before shifting back to confident superiority tinged with mild confusion about current scoring system. The afternoon session, the expedition leader announced, would take them deeper into the preserve, where the prey species were larger, more challenging, and though he didn't mention this part, had been specifically selected for their ability to recognize and respond appropriately to different hunting strategies. Prince Aethon's response was predictable. He glowed brighter. The human's response was considerably more subtle, and as events would shortly prove, significantly more effective. Because while evolution had given the Ethereal Dominion many impressive abilities, it had apparently forgotten to include situational awareness, or the radical concept that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones you didn't see coming. The prince was about to receive an education in the difference between being spectacular and being successful. Unfortunately for his ego, the lesson would be delivered by someone he had dismissed as a soft human girl, who apparently understood that proper predators don't announce their presence with the subtlety of a supernova. The afternoon hunt was about to begin, and something told the monitoring systems that the scoring was about to become very interesting indeed. The deeper preserve was where the bureaucrats had allowed themselves a moment of actual creativity. Here, The carefully maintained balance between authentic wilderness experience and diplomatic incident prevention leaned more heavily toward the former. The trees grew taller and closer together, the undergrowth thickened into genuine concealment opportunities, and the prey species had been selected for their ability to provide what the planning committee euphemistically called enhanced challenge parameters. Prince Aethon approached this new environment with the same tactical brilliance he had demonstrated all morning, by announcing his presence with the enthusiasm of a one-entity light parade. His bioluminescent tattoos had shifted to what could only be described as aggressively confident, pulsing in patterns that roughly translated to "observe me dominate this ecosystem through superior evolution." The human, meanwhile, had taken one look at the terrain and immediately identified 17 different ways someone could die if they were stupid enough to advertise their location to every predator in the area. She had also noted the subtle changes in the local fauna's behavior, the way certain bird analogs had gone silent, how the insect sounds had shifted to frequencies that suggested something new had entered their environment. Something that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. The first sign that the afternoon session might deviate from the morning's scripted entertainment came when Prince Aethon's usual dramatic gesture, a sweeping energy manipulation that caused nearby vegetation to respond with sympathetic luminescence, resulted in absolute silence, not the respectful quiet of prey species recognizing a superior predator, but the profound hush that fell over ecosystems when something genuinely dangerous was paying attention. Curious, the prince mused, apparently interpreting the ominous stillness as evidence of his overwhelming presence. His tattoos brightened as he prepared an even more impressive display. The local species appeared to be demonstrating appropriate deference. From her concealed position roughly 200 meters away, the human watched with the sort of professional interest typically reserved for observing spectacular mistakes in real time. She had already identified the new variables in the equation: pack hunters, energy signature tracking, and what appeared to be intelligence levels significantly higher than anything mentioned in the preserve specification. The Nexus stalkers emerged from the canopy with the fluid grace of creatures perfectly adapted to their environment. Standing roughly 4 meters tall when fully extended, they possessed the sort of predatory elegance that suggested millions of years of evolutionary refinement, dedicated to the art of killing things efficiently. Their hide shifted between active camouflage patterns. Their sensory organs tracked heat and electromagnetic signatures with precision that would make military targeting systems jealous, and their hunting behavior demonstrated the sort of coordination that indicated pack intelligence. More importantly, from Prince Aethon's perspective, they appeared to find bioluminescent displays absolutely fascinating. The pack leader tilted its head with the sort of curiosity that predators reserved for particularly interesting prey items. Its optical clusters tracked the prince's energy patterns with an attention that suggested either profound appreciation for artistic expression or careful calculation of caloric content. The other pack members began spreading into flanking positions with the sort of tactical awareness that indicated this wasn't their first encounter with glowing entity. Prince Aethon, oblivious to the fact that he had transitioned from predator to prey in the span of 30 seconds, continued his commentary on proper hunting technique. Advanced species understand that energy manipulation serves multiple purposes. He explained to what he apparently believed was an audience of impressed woodland creatures: territorial display, prey intimidation, and demonstration of genetic superiority. The pack leader responded by emitting a subsonic frequency that roughly translated as "dinner is served." What followed could generously be described as educational. Prince Aethon discovered that energy projection, while impressive in controlled circumstances, became considerably less useful when every blast served as a targeting beacon for creatures specifically evolved to hunt energy-manipulating prey. His bioluminescent tattoos, previously a source of pride, now functioned as a continuous advertisement of his location to predators, whose sensory apparatus was perfectly calibrated to track such signatures. The human watched the prince's first encounter with actual danger unfold, with the sort of professional assessment that came from extensive experience with people getting themselves killed through spectacular overconfidence. She noted his tactical errors, cataloged his defensive capabilities, and calculated approximately how long he would survive if left to his own devices. The answer was distressingly brief. Her intervention came not from any particular fondness for arrogant crystalline entities, but from the practical consideration that diplomatic incidents involving the death of foreign royalty tended to result in extremely tedious paperwork. She moved through the undergrowth with the sort of efficiency that suggested extensive practice at keeping idiots alive despite their best efforts to achieve the opposite. The first stalker never realized it had been flanked until the human's primitive metal implements introduced it to concepts like structural integrity failure and sudden deceleration trauma. The pack's attention shifted with the sort of tactical flexibility that indicated they understood the difference between easy prey and actual threats. Move, the human instructed the prince with the sort of calm authority that suggested she had dealt with similar situations before. No light, no energy projection, no dramatic gestures. Follow me and try not to glow. Prince Aethon's tattoos flickered between indignant outrage and dawning comprehension that the situation had become significantly more complex. His evolutionary advantages, so impressive during the morning's carefully controlled exercises, had become liabilities in an environment where every advantage he possessed served as a targeting system for predators specifically adapted to hunt his species. "This is impossible," he muttered, his bioluminescence dimming to levels that could merely be seen from low orbit rather than deep space. The preserve specifications clearly stated that no lethal predators were present. Apparently, the human replied, guiding him through terrain that provided maximum concealment while maintaining escape routes. Someone forgot to mention that to them. The pack regrouped with the sort of tactical coordination that suggested they had hunted glowing prey before. Their movement patterns indicated intelligence, adaptability, and what appeared to be genuine enjoyment of the challenge. They had identified two targets now, one that glowed like a beacon and attracted attention, and one that moved through their territory like smoke and shadow. The humans' assessment of their situation was succinct. They were being hunted by creatures perfectly adapted to kill Prince Aethon's species, in an environment that favored the hunters, with no backup and no extraction protocol. The prince's superior evolution had become a comprehensive liability, and his energy manipulation abilities were worse than useless. "Can you turn off the light show?" she asked, noting how the pack was using his bioluminescent emissions to coordinate their flanking maneuver. "Turn off." Prince Aethon's tattoos flared with what could only be interpreted as profound offense. These patterns represent millennia of evolutionary refinement. They cannot simply be turned off like primitive artificial illumination. The human observed a pack member moving into an optimal ambush position and made a rapid tactical decision. "Then we're going to have to get creative about keeping you alive." What followed was a masterclass in the difference between evolutionary advantages and practical survival skill. The human orchestrated their movement through the preserve using terrain, timing, and the radical concept of not announcing their location to everything within sensory range. She used the prince's unavoidable luminescence as bait, positioning him to draw the pack's attention while she maneuvered into positions where his glowing served as illumination rather than liability. Prince Aethon, for his part, experienced the novel sensation of following someone else's tactical decision. His evolutionary superiority had never prepared him for scenarios where his advantages became disadvantages, where his natural abilities attracted rather than deterred predators, and where survival depended on primitive skills like not making noise and staying hidden. The pack adapted to their tactics with disturbing speed, demonstrating intelligence that suggested they were not merely predators, but active problem solvers. They began using the prince's light emissions to coordinate complex ambush patterns, forcing the human to constantly adjust her strategies to compensate for her unwilling partner's inability to stop advertising their position. By the time they had evaded the third coordinated assault, Prince Aethon's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to what the universal translator rendered as profound confusion mixed with grudging respect for primitive survival technique. His worldview, carefully constructed around assumptions of evolutionary superiority, was encountering the uncomfortable reality that sometimes the most advanced abilities were spectacularly unsuited for actual survival. The human, meanwhile, continued to demonstrate that millions of years of evolution without the benefit of energy manipulation had produced a species remarkably well suited for not being dead. Her techniques relied on observation, adaptation, and the apparently revolutionary concept that effective predators didn't need to announce their presence to succeed. As the afternoon wore on and the pack's hunting strategies became increasingly sophisticated, Prince Aethon began to suspect that his assessment of soft human might require significant revision, because while she lacked his species' impressive biological enhancements, she possessed something his evolution had apparently overlooked: the ability to keep them both alive in a situation where all his advantages had become comprehensive liability. The pack was still out there, still hunting, and still perfectly adapted to kill glowing crystalline entities. But now they faced a new variable in their tactical calculations, a species that had learned to survive by being underestimated, and whose most dangerous characteristic was the ability to turn other species' strengths into weaknesses. The final confrontation was approaching, and something told Prince Aethon that his education in practical humility was far from complete. The pack leader was a masterpiece of evolutionary design, assuming one's definition of artistic achievement included optimized for dismantling glowing crystalline entities with maximum efficiency. Standing nearly 5 meters when fully extended, it possessed the sort of predatory magnificence that suggested nature had spent considerable time perfecting the art of turning advanced civilizations into digestible components. Its hide rippled with adaptive camouflage that made it nearly invisible until it moved, at which point it became a flowing nightmare of claws, teeth, and what appeared to be genuine tactical intelligence. More troubling still, it had clearly identified Prince Aethon as the equivalent of a walking buffet advertisement. The prince's bioluminescent display, now dimmed to what he apparently considered subtle, but which still resembled a small star having an identity crisis, continued to serve as a beacon for every predator within sensor range. His tattoos flickered between patterns that the universal translator struggled to interpret, settling on something approximating existential crisis, with undertones of wounded pride. This situation, he announced with the sort of regal dignity typically reserved for declaring war or ordering executions, is highly irregular. The human who had been using the past several minutes to conduct what could generously be called tactical reconnaissance, and more accurately described as figuring out how to kill something twice her size with equipment designed for considerably smaller problems, paused in her preparations to observe that irregularity was relative. From their perspective, she noted, gesturing toward the pack leader who was currently demonstrating advanced problem-solving skills by testing various approach angles. "You're exactly what they ordered." The final confrontation had selected itself, a natural clearing where the preserve's designers had thoughtfully provided both dramatic lighting and multiple escape routes, though the latter assumed one wasn't being hunted by creatures specifically adapted to track energy signature. The pack had maneuvered them here with the sort of tactical coordination that suggested either advanced intelligence or extensive experience with glowing prey species. Prince Aethon surveyed their situation with the air of someone discovering that superior evolution didn't automatically translate to superior survival odds. His energy manipulation abilities, so impressive during controlled demonstrations, had become elaborate methods of advertising his location to predators, whose sensory apparatus treated bioluminescence as dinner bells. "I require a moment to assess our tactical options," he declared, his tattoos brightening as he prepared what appeared to be another spectacular display of counterproductive energy projection. "No." The human's response carried the sort of finality typically reserved for laws of physics. "You require a moment to do exactly what I tell you when I tell you, without glowing, commenting, or demonstrating anything to anyone." The pack leader emerged from the tree line with the fluid grace of something that had never encountered a problem it couldn't solve through direct application of violence. Its optical clusters tracked the prince's energy patterns with the sort of focused attention that suggested it was calculating optimal bite angle. The other pack members spread into flanking positions with mathematical precision, their movements coordinated by subsonic communications that indicated pack intelligence rather than mere predatory instinct. Prince Aethon's worldview, constructed around millennia of assumptions about evolutionary superiority, encountered the uncomfortable reality that his species' advantages had become comprehensive liability. His bioluminescent tattoos dimmed further, as he experienced what could charitably be called tactical humility, and more accurately described as dawning comprehension of imminent mortality. "What?" he asked with the sort of careful dignity reserved for profound understatements. Do you suggest? The human's plan, when explained, possessed the sort of elegant simplicity that suggested extensive experience with keeping overconfident individuals alive, despite their natural inclinations towards spectacular self-destruction. It required Prince Aethon to do something completely contrary to his evolutionary programming: remain absolutely silent, suppress his bioluminescent display to barely detectable levels, and follow instructions without commentary, clarification, or improvement suggestion. This strategy relies on primitive deception, he protested, his tattoos flickering with what could only be interpreted as profound philosophical objection. Advanced species do not engage in. The pack leader's response was a subsonic frequency that roughly translated as target acquired, engaging. Prince Aethon's objections ceased with remarkable promptness. What followed was a demonstration in the practical applications of what the human species called asymmetric warfare, and what everyone else called cheating with style. She used the prince's unavoidable luminescence, not as a liability but as the central component of an elaborate misdirection, positioning him to draw the pack's attention, while she maneuvered into positions that turned his glowing from advertisement into advantage. The pack leader approached with the confidence of something that had never encountered prey capable of tactical innovation. Its hunting patterns followed evolutionary programming perfectly adapted for creatures that relied on energy manipulation for defense: surround, isolate, overwhelm. What it hadn't encountered was prey that understood the difference between using abilities and being used by them. Prince Aethon, following instructions with the sort of rigid precision that suggested his survival instincts had finally overruled his ego, maintained his position as director. His bioluminescent display, carefully controlled for the first time in his adult life, provided illumination rather than advertisement. He discovered the novel experience of being helpful rather than dominant, useful rather than superior. The human struck from an angle the pack leader's evolutionary programming hadn't anticipated, not as a secondary threat to be eliminated after the primary target, but as the actual predator, using the glowing entity as bait. Her primitive metal implements, so laughably inadequate during the morning's demonstrations, proved remarkably effective at introducing advanced alien anatomy to concepts like structural failure and rapid deceleration trauma. The pack's coordination, so effective when dealing with predictable prey responses, became a liability when their tactical assumptions proved incorrect. They had adapted perfectly to hunt energy-manipulating species that relied on their abilities for both offense and defense. They were considerably less prepared for species that had learned to survive without impressive biological enhancements. The aftermath was education. The pack leader, demonstrating the sort of adaptive intelligence that had made it apex predator, reassessed its tactical situation with the speed that marked genuinely successful hunters. It had identified two new variables: prey that used misdirection rather than energy projection, and the uncomfortable realization that its hunting parameters might require significant revision. The standoff that followed possessed the sort of tension typically reserved for diplomatic negotiations between species with strong feelings about territorial boundary. The pack leader evaluated the human with the sort of professional respect one predator accorded another, while Prince Aethon experienced the novel sensation of being protected rather than doing the protect. Eventually the pack leader made the sort of tactical decision that marked truly intelligent hunters. It withdrew, not from fear, but from the practical recognition that some prey presented challenges that exceeded their caloric value. The human had demonstrated capabilities that shifted her classification from secondary target to potential threat, while the prince had proven that even glowing prey could be dangerous when properly managed. As the pack melted back into the forest with the same fluid grace they had used to emerge, Prince Aethon discovered himself reassessing several fundamental assumptions about evolutionary superiority. His bioluminescent tattoos flickered through patterns that the universal translator struggled with, before settling on something approximating profound confusion mixed with grudging respect. "Your species," he said finally, his voice carrying none of its previous harmonic enhancement, "appears to possess capabilities
not immediately apparent from superficial observation. The human who was conducting a methodical equipment check with the sort of professional attention that suggested this wasn't her first encounter with predatory misunderstandings, observed that appearances could be deceptive. Evolution, she noted while inspecting her primitive metal implements for damage, optimizes for survival, not spectacle. Sometimes the most dangerous species are the ones that don't advertise. Prince Aethon contemplated this observation with the sort of attention typically reserved for profound philosophical revelation. His assumptions about human frailty, so carefully constructed around visible evidence of biological inadequacy, were encountering the uncomfortable reality that effectiveness and advertisement were not synonymous. The journey back to the preserve's staging area provided additional opportunities for tactical education. The human navigated the terrain with the sort of efficiency that suggested extensive familiarity with environments where making mistakes resulted in permanent consequences, while Prince Aethon practiced the revolutionary concept of moving quietly through potentially hostile territory. The other diplomatic delegates, who had spent the afternoon engaged in considerably less eventful hunting exercises, greeted their return with the sort of interest typically reserved for improbable survival stories. The Graxian delegates' mandibles clicked in patterns that suggested either amusement or professional assessment, while the Valkyrian representative maintained her unsettling smile with what might have been approval. The expedition leader, whose primary qualification appeared to be an extraordinary talent for preventing interstellar incidents, conducted a brief debriefing that tactfully avoided mentioning the presence of apex predators, not included in the preserve specification. His questions focused on hunting success rates and interspecies cooperation, diplomatically skirting around topics like how many times did the prince nearly become lunch. Prince Aethon's final assessment, delivered with the sort of careful dignity reserved for major philosophical adjustments, acknowledged that human hunting techniques possessed certain practical applications, not immediately apparent from initial observation. His bioluminescent tattoos had settled into patterns that suggested profound contemplation, mixed with what might charitably be called intellectual humility. The human's assessment was characteristically more direct. When asked about the prince's performance, she observed that for someone whose species had apparently mastered energy manipulation, he certainly made a lot of noise about it. Her tone suggested that while she had kept him alive, this represented professional competence, rather than personal fondness for glowing crystalline entities. As the diplomatic party prepared for departure, Prince Aethon approached the human with something approaching actual respect. His usual harmonic enhancement was notably absent. His bioluminescent display dimmed to levels that could only be described as almost subtle, and his manner suggested someone who had recently experienced a comprehensive revision of several cherished assumptions. "I may," he said with the sort of careful precision reserved for significant admissions, "have underestimated certain aspects of human capability." The human's response was delivered with the sort of dry observation that suggested she had extensive experience with overconfident individuals. Discovering the difference between reputation and reality happens more often than you'd think, she noted. Most species assume that anything that doesn't glow, project energy, or demonstrate obvious biological weapons must be harmless. She paused to consider the prince's crystalline features with what might have been amusement. "Usually works out well for us." As their transports prepared for departure from Nexus 7, the preserve returned to its carefully maintained balance of controlled wilderness and diplomatic safety. The Nexus stalkers melted back into the deeper forest, their hunting patterns adjusted by the afternoon's educational encounter with species that didn't conform to expected behavioral parameters. The human settled into her transport with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully completed another day of keeping overconfident aliens alive, despite their best efforts to achieve the opposite. Her equipment was properly stowed, her reports would be filed with appropriate bureaucratic precision, and her assessment of ethereal hunting capabilities would be archived under spectacular but counterproductive. Prince Aethon, meanwhile, contemplated the afternoon's lessons with the sort of attention typically reserved for profound philosophical adjustments. His species' evolutionary advantages so impressive in controlled demonstrations, had proven spectacularly unsuited for actual survival situations. More troubling still, the soft human he had dismissed as evolutionarily inferior had demonstrated capabilities that suggested his understanding of advancement might require comprehensive revision. As their respective transports departed the preserve, both carried away insights that would influence future diplomatic relations between their species. The Ethereal Dominion would need to reassess their assumptions about human capabilities, while humanity gained additional confirmation that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that made the least noise about it. The preserve monitoring systems recorded the day's events with bureaucratic satisfaction, noting successful completion of diplomatic objectives with minimal interstellar incident potential. The unauthorized presence of apex predators would be addressed through appropriate administrative channels, though the final reports would diplomatically omit references to how close certain participants had come to transitioning from diplomats to dietary components. And somewhere in the preserve's deeper wilderness, the Nexus stalkers settled into their territory with the sort of professional satisfaction that marked successful hunters. They had gained new appreciation for the complexity of prey behavior, learned that even glowing targets could present unexpected challenges, and acquired healthy respect for species that survived through intelligence rather than advertisement. After all, the most effective predators were often the ones that didn't announce their presence, with the subtlety of dying stars, a lesson that Prince Aethon, despite his crystalline brilliance, was only beginning to understand.